episode of Inside the Mind, the official podcast of Missouri S&T Athletics, episode 18. That seems kind of crazy to think about. It feels like just yesterday we got this show started. But I want to take a moment to let you know this episode is sponsored by Minor Corporate Club member Price Chopper. I want to thank them for their support of minor athletics and membership in the Minor Corporate Club. We're going to be talking with Assistant AD for NCAA Compliance and Recreation, Josh Lind, on the show today. But before we do, if you could please be a friend, tell a friend about this show as we continue to share the stories with our student athletes and talk with administrators, staff, and alumni about all things Missouri S&T athletics. Short recap before getting into today's conversation. Baseball had just one game last week, a midweek affair with Maryville. After coming off a weekend where they split with University of Indianapolis and Great Lakes Valley Conference action. Their weekend series, originally scheduled for the Easter weekend with Wisconsin Parkside, was canceled due to COVID protocols within the Rangers program. We hope everybody up in Kenosha is doing good and recovering from those. But talking about that Maryville game, the Miners started off strong, went up 5-0 early as they seemed to be continuing their momentum from the final two games of that series with the Greyhounds, but they couldn't quite sustain that offensive output. Despite scoring some runs late, got back into the game, got close. At one point brought the tying run to the plate, but Maryville managed to hang on, pick up a 13-9 win, and take the season series 2-0 in the process. Dakota Sill went 3 for 5 in that game with an RBI and a walk. Braden Mahiran went 2 for 3 with 2 runs batted in, while Doug Wood continued his hot hitting, went 1 for 3 with a double and 2 RBIs, while David Kephart worked one of his best outings of the year, worked 3 scoreless innings of relief over the final 3 frames of that contest. Softball was back in action over the weekend, just a single set of games for Kathy Monroe's ball club this weekend. They went up to the Gem City to take on Quincy on the Saturday before Easter. A marathon affair in Game 1 to get things going Saturday. 11 innings of action. The Miners came out on top in Game 1, 5-3, scored the tying run in the 7th as Madison Pasolano drove home Hannah Anseladas before the Miners scored twice in the 11th inning, first on a Taylor Caton sac fly to go ahead, and then an E6 by the Hawks for an insurance run. Miners unfortunately fell in Game 2 to the Hawks 7-1. Jumping back to Game 1 for a quick moment, Bryn Wooldridge worked all 11 innings in that contest, struck out 7, scattered 8 hits. Just a couple weekends left in the regular season as the Miners are in a fight with several other teams for a berth in the GLVC tournament, currently tied with 3 other schools at the moment, I believe, for, I think, 7th in the conference standings. John Keene is nodding an affirmative from his desk. On the other side of our office, track and field was back at home for their second meet of the season, the Dewey Allgood Invitational over the weekend. Saw a combined 24 first-place showings in several meet records from the men's and women's teams. On the women's side, Maya Washington took home the top spot in the 100 meters. Emily Griesenauer won the 1,500 and 5,000-meter events. Megan Cook took home the top spot in the 800 meters. Jessica Rhodes took home the number 1 spot on the podium in the discus and hammer throw. And Maria Tyson again won the high jump. Sydney Gratz, you might recognize that name from women's soccer, leading goal scorer, leader in assists, and leading point scorer last year, took home the top spot in the women's pole vault, while Grace Geisler won the 3,000-meter steeplechase, and as a team, the Miners finished first in the 4x400 relay. On the men's side of things, Otto Nittel won the 110-meter hurdles. Samuel Schmidt took home the top spot in the 100 and 200-meter dashes. Aaron Tobin won the 400-meter hurdles. Luke Allen won the triple jump. Mitch Fairless set a meet record in the high jump. Joseph Nickel was the number 1 spot in the pole vault. Jarrett Johnson set a meet record with a number 1 podium finish in the javelin. Jacob Lubert took home the top spot in the hammer throw. Watching him warm up over at the throwing ring Saturday, taking photos, I'm not surprised by that result. He was absolutely throwing some bombs out there. Hayes Petito won the steeplechase, also set a meet record in that event. Nathan Swadley continued his dominance in the shot put this season, took home the top spot in that event, as well as the discus. Nick Yankee, younger brother of Michael Yankee, who used to work in the sports information office when he was a student here at Missouri S&T, won the long jump, and as a team, the Miners also took home the number 1 spot in the 4x1 relay. Also, over the weekend, the men's golf team was competing at the 2022 Great Lakes Valley Conference Championships. Miners spent some time in the lead over the first day of that event. Finished day one tied for third overall on the leaderboard. Ended up giving some ground on day two. Saturday ended up with a team score of 892. Finished top five. Just missed out on advancing to match play on Sunday, as only the top four teams advanced to that. Carl Milton, the reigning medalist, who took home the top spot individually as a freshman last year, backed that up with another solid performance this year. Finished third overall in the field with a 54-hole score of 213, low score of 69 in the first round of Action Friday. Was named to the Great Lakes Valley Conference All-Conference first team as a result of his efforts there. Newcomer Yepa Taibo faced some adversity in his final round, but still managed to bring home a top 15 result, finishing T12. Others competitors in the field from Missouri S&T, Gustav Lilledal finished tied for 32nd. Fatho Young finished 38th, while Colin Stolze brought home a top 50 finish, finishing tied for 45th overall. Missouri St. Louis ended up winning the stroke play title, followed by Indianapolis, Southern Indiana, and McKendree. Those teams all went to match play, and if I find the right email, I believe UMSL ended up winning the men's golf championship. So congratulations to the Tritons there on another stellar season. Looking ahead to this week, baseball will be back in Rolla for the final games of their home slate this week, beginning Tuesday against Pittsburgh State. That game, originally scheduled for Tuesday, was then moved to a Wednesday, which has now been moved back to Tuesday due to inclement weather in the Rolla area forecasted for Wednesday, before they'll wrap up their home slate over the weekend, with Illinois Springfield currently leading the Great Lakes Valley Conference Blue Division in baseball. And is what it'll be kind of a crucial stretch for the baseball team as they look to secure a berth in the postseason. Softball will head east for the Indiana swing this weekend. They got Southern Indiana and Indianapolis on deck, while track and field going to make the short trip east up I-44 to St. Charles for the Dick Creer Invitational hosted by Lindenwood University. We're going to step aside, take a short break, be back on the other side to talk with Josh Lind, talking all things compliance and eligibility, along with a little bit of officiating on this episode of Inside the Mine, again presented by Missouri S&T Corporate Club member Price Chopper. Back to this episode of Inside the Mine, presented by Price Chopper. Again, want to thank them for their membership in the Missouri S&T Corporate Club and their support of Missouri S&T Athletics. Joining us now, he's the Assistant Athletic Director for NCAA Compliance and Recreation here at Missouri S&T and has been a member of the Athletic Department since 2012. In his addition to his administrative duties, he also serves as the advisor to the M Club and Student Athlete Advisory Committee. He played college basketball at Mid-America Christian University and following his playing career, spent 2 years as an assistant coach with the men's program and 2 years as the head coach of the women's program. During his time at Missouri S&T, he's also spent time working in the Student Financial Assistant Office, and he also spends time as a basketball and football official at the high school and prep levels, or high school and collegiate levels, excuse me. Please welcome Josh Lind to the show. Josh, thanks for stopping by, taking time out of your day to chat with us. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Murph. It's good to finally be inside the mine after watching from the outside for so long.
Awesome. I'm glad we could get you on this week and chat with you about all things compliance and also talk about officiating as well. But how's the year been for you so far? I know there's always things to stay on top of and keep up with in the realm of compliance and making sure everybody stays eligible to compete, especially this year since we're now in year one of the name, image, and likeness era. How's the workload and everything been for you? Has it been a little bit more than usual with everything else going on this year, or how's that been?
Well, overall, I would say that this year has kind of finally been a normal year in terms of compliance and eligibility. There were a lot of changes that took place over the COVID period with eligibility rules and competition, seasons of competition waiver, eligibility waivers, things like that. So this is really the first year we've kind of had a quote unquote normal year. A lot of the COVID exemptions and things that the NCAA handed out and rule modifications during the year have expired. So as far as our current year, just our day-to-day processes, a lot of the things we were tracking because of the COVID rules that were put in place and exceptions, we're no longer tracking. We're back to a quote-unquote normal scenario. We do still have student athletes here that will be able to play for a fifth year or a couple extra semesters because of those COVID waivers and exceptions. But the actual rules surrounding some of the things like how much contact coaches can have during the year with the student athletes and potentially in the summer, things like that, have been allowed to expire. Some of the modifications they made, but the effects we'll see for the next 3-4 years, because those freshmen who were affected their first year from COVID obviously will be able to use those extensions as they finish out their careers. So we're not totally done with it yet.
For sure. I know it's trying to keep track of, obviously, with everybody has been impacted by COVID with their athletic departments in different ways across the country. I mean, I know there were some people that, I mean, obviously everybody shut down in that spring of 2020, and then there were some folks that didn't play last year, and then there's some folks who did play, but they didn't play a lot. But they also played limited schedules and everything else. Talking with some of your colleagues across the country, what's kind of been some of the things that have kind of stood out this year? Obviously, first year of NIL. Students can sign deals to use their name, image, and likeness to earn some additional money during their time as a student athlete. Obviously, with the eligibility stuff, has there been is there a lot of people that are really taking advantage of that fifth year? I know, obviously, here at S&T, most engineering degrees tend to take a little bit longer. Without divulging too much information, just kind of. So what's just kind of been some things you've noticed across the country, or you've talked with some colleagues and picked up this year?
Sure. So in terms of, I think we do see more student athletes going to use that fifth year. The percentage of those using a fifth year is probably a little bit less affected here because, like you said, many of our engineering degrees and co-ops and things that students go on naturally lend themselves to a 5-year experience.
And you obviously, if we keep a factor in, maybe like somebody's going to take a redshirt year here anyway,
Yep.
and then that
Yep.
extra waiver year would be like a sixth year for them.
Yeah, so we do
almost.
see some that will actually have 6 seasons on the team. They will only still use 4 years of eligibility, but they will actually have been on the roster, as it were, for 6 seasons. So we see some of that, maybe not as in greater numbers as other institutions where their student athletes typically just play 4 years and go. We probably see the extended careers a little more even on a normal basis. So we see a little bit of that, a little bit of an uptick with those kind of student athletes. From the NIL perspective, just the landscape with that and my peers at other GLVC institutions was the biggest thing at first was just what are we going to do as an institution? Because the NIL rule did not go through the typical process that rules go through.
Yeah, it was kind of everybody was figuring it out as it goes, and it's at the state level, but not the national level.
And typically rule changes in the NCAA are a slow burn. They are proposed by either individual conferences or perhaps some management councils, things like that, within the hierarchy of the NCAA. And then it goes through a process of being reviewed and modified before it finally goes to the NCAA convention to actually get voted on. And like I said, that's a slow burn. That takes a year and a half. So those rule changes are out there for review, where the NIL, it was a matter of weeks from the first time you heard, oh, this may happen, to them coming out with what was essentially emergency legislation and saying this is happening as of June 1 or whenever it started. So the biggest thing for schools was just kind of scrambling to figure out, okay, what are we going to do as a school about this?
Getting those policies and everything in place so that you can answer the questions that your athletes may have.
Correct. And The rule itself, and this is the way it seems like the NCAA is trending. It's a very beneficial rule from the student athlete's perspective for them, and it's not super detailed when it comes where rules about practice times and what counts as practice and what doesn't can get long and arduous. Where the NIL rule is kind of pretty simple. It just says that they can do this. They can sign endorsement deals. They can, and so there's not a long laundry list of rules. So it was really up to individual institutions to decide, okay, what is our institutional policy going to be? Obviously, we're not going to get in the way of any NIL deals, but especially when it comes to who are these student athletes signing with? What kind of products are we okay with them endorsing and
Sure,
not
yeah.
okay? And there are certain things that around the nation, most institutions would agree that probably don't want our student athletes representing this kind of stuff. Obviously, like sports gambling is a big one, and other things kind of on the fringes of society that schools are not real excited about their student athletes being involved with and endorsing. So schools will have varying policies on what they can and can't do, but from a macro view, the schools really try to get out of the way and let the student athletes market themselves and sign those deals. And in fact, in the rule, it does insinuate that schools should not be the arbiter of these deals, that athletics departments should not be the ones contacting businesses and hooking student athletes up with businesses. That is the student athlete's brand, and that is their brand to pursue. And it's not the school's job to get involved in that from a sourcing those opportunities. They would rather the school provide an advisory take for the students to where they can ask questions and things like that. So, the biggest thing is just within our institutions and the compliance offices, around the league and around the nation is, okay, what do we do? And we did come up with a policy and vetted it through our general counsel and everything, which I think is pretty standard based on the other ones in Missouri. Some states have different rules about what you can and can't do as an institution when it comes to NILs. So we just made sure we were, in step with the state legislature's rules on NILs. And it's a policy that, like I said, doesn't get in the way. It lets the student athletes pursue their own brand, and with some guidelines, some boundaries on some types of businesses and things that we'd like them to steer away from. But overall, it's really just beneficial for the student athletes. Gives them an avenue to create some income for themselves.
I know I've got a colleague. He's currently, I believe he's either a GA or an intern at Southern Miss. But when he was at Boise State as an intern, he kind of helped write their NIL policy during his time there before he left. Kind of what went into, obviously, Division II, you're still going to have kids sign name, image, likeness deals. Maybe not necessarily making $1 million a year deal like a 5-star recruit going to a Power 5 school, but just kind of when you're going through writing out the guidelines and the handbook and putting all that together, what was kind of that process like? Were you looking at places that had already had stuff in place, already announced things, and kind of saying, okay, this would work here, this won't work here. Just what was that like?
So it was very much a process of seeing what was out there. A lot of schools really were on the ball quick with their policies and were out there. And at the time we were creating ours, there were quite a few out there already. So that was our starting block. Obviously, we're going to start with the legislation itself and start with that, and then see what else was out there from a policy standpoint. And like you said, it was a lot of just kind of putting together the things that made sense for us. And then taking some items out depending on the policy that we kind of used as our template, things that wouldn't make sense for us, or if a school is real restrictive on something that we didn't feel like we needed to be so restrictive on, we take that out. And then once we have kind of a working document, we look at the state legislature, the state of Missouri, which the state of Missouri has not gotten extremely involved in NILs, so it wasn't much to worry about with that.
Sure, yeah.
Obviously, it's several of us within the department. The AD, our faculty athletic representative gets a look at it. Our senior woman administrator gets a look at it. So we all kind of put in that input, and then once we feel like we have a good document, we send it up to our general counsel, our legal teams, and they take a look at it. They made some minor modifications to it, but overall they were fine with it. And once general counsel signs off, you send it to the student athletes, you put it on the website, and you really cinch down your process for it. And ours is pretty simple. Student athlete has an NIL opportunity. They just email me as the compliance director within the department. We have a pretty simple form that they fill out and send back to me, and myself and the AD kind of review it together. A couple things, student athletes cannot use S&T trademarks and logos without
I feel like
permission.
that's a pretty consistent one across the board.
So we want to know, are they going to use S&T logos and things in these activities? And if so, that doesn't mean we don't want them to or they can't, but the way they do them it has to be in a prescribed manner that the marketing department comes in with us and works with us on making sure that if they are going to use our logos, they do them in a way that's consistent with the brand. And then also we're looking at who they're signing with. Does this violate our kind of, I'll just say, our morality clause at the bottom as far as some of the things that we don't really want promoted by student athletes.
Sure.
And as long as those things are in line, it's a quick sign off. We've got it back to them really quick, and good luck, and then they can go make their money.
Absolutely, that's the great thing about having that policy in place, and finally allowing student athletes to use their position to help better themselves and better their families and better the communities they're involved in as well. One thing I didn't have in my notes, but I do want to ask you about, how has the transfer portal affected the landscape of college athletics, and just kind of how much of your day do you spend looking at that, seeing if we've got kids going in the portal, if there's people that I guess reached out through the portal saying they're interested in us, just what does that all look like on like a daily basis?
So as a compliance administrator, an assistant AD for compliance, I wouldn't say the portal's added a ton more work for us, at least in my position. The actions of the portal and the whole reason of the portal are it's a situation that we already had. Student athletes, this is not a new thing. Student athletes have been transferring for years. So transfer itself is not a new thing. So before the portal, we still had a process where if a student athlete wanted to talk to another school, there was a process to do that. But there was a little more power held within the institution that could say, yes, we're going to give you permission to contact, or no, we're not. So, and also as far as the transfer and immediate eligibility, there was a little more onus on the school that they could kind of control that narrative and that process. Now, so the transfer process isn't new. So we've always had to work on permission to contact and transfer and eligibility. What the portal has done is it has created more flexibility and obviously a more open market for student athletes. So schools no longer have the option to say, no, we're not going to grant you permission to contact other schools. And schools no longer have the option to say, no, we're not going to agree to give you immediate eligibility if you go to another school, which in the past you could do. The school could grant those. We call them a one-time transfer exception, that if the student athlete met certain criteria and the school they were leaving was okay with it, they could play right away at the new school. So the transfer portal started as just a permission to contact portal, which that way it streamlined that process. So instead of me typing up a letter for a student athlete that says they can talk to other schools, now all I have to do is put them in that portal. And any D1, D2, or D3 coach can get in there and see that they're in there instead of having to get a letter from me. So it streamlined that process. After a year or two of the transfer portal, then Division II changed their rules to align with Division I that says schools can no longer say no to the immediate eligibility on a student athlete transferring out. And so that added another layer of the portal to where it does create a more open market for student athletes looking to transfer. Student athletes could always transfer in Division II and play right away if they met the criteria for that what we call the one-time transfer exception. So transferring is probably more of a maybe in the past it wasn't seen as such a cool thing to do, and now it's kind of become normalized. Similar to the sports world and the professional sports world and free agency and things like that. So I think transferring has become more attractive to student athletes. Whether that's good or bad for programs, I think a lot of schools and coaches would say it's bad. But it's certainly given the student athletes more flexibility, and as they look to maybe play at another school. And I will say, even with the rule changes, I think there's a big misconception that it's just the Wild West, that anybody can go anywhere and play right away, and that's not true. Even with the rule changes that say you can no longer, as a school, stand in the way of a transfer, that's only if that student athlete meets the one-time transfer exception still. So they have to be eligible when they leave. So they can't be failing classes and then go play somewhere else because they failed out. That's not going to happen. It has to be their first transfer. So the student that goes from school A to school B to school C to school D, after that very first transfer,
they got to sit
there
for
is
some
no
period.
there is no longer an option to play right away after that first transfer. So I think there's a narrative out there, and it's probably perpetuated by some of the talking heads at ESPN and things, that now it's just an open market. Anybody can go anywhere and play right away, and that's just not true. It's really just removed the school's ability to block a player from playing right away if they meet all the other terms of the transfer exception. And just anecdotally, in my 10 years, I don't know if we've ever said no to the one-time transfer exception for somebody. So it's not something that at least at our level, Division II, in our institution, that we've seen a great shift in culture or anything like that. Do we put kids in the transfer portal? Sure. We've got several of them in this year's. They're looking to change their athletic environment for their collegiate athletic career. But I would say it's made some things easier for us as far as our processes go, and a little more flexible for the student athletes.
It almost kind of sounds like it was the next kind of natural step in the evolution of the transfer process to an extent. Um, taking a step back, kind of talk about your time as a student athlete. What was that experience like for you? What are some things that kind of stood out, during your time in college, and kind of how do you think that at time as a student athlete may kind of help guide your career to one working in college athletics and in higher education?
I think number one, I enjoyed it, and so I think somebody wants to enjoy the career they do. So my collegiate experience, was defined by athletics. If there was the biggest thing I remember about college was playing basketball. And not to say the academics weren't important or that I didn't enjoy them, but that was kind of the identity of my collegiate experience was wrapped around, playing college basketball. And so taking that experience and then thinking about what to do with the career, I wanted to coach right away. I thought that was the avenue I wanted to pursue, and so I did that. Now I was at a small university where you can't just coach. Maybe there's one full-time coach on the whole staff, where everybody else is. If you're going to coach, especially as an assistant coach starting out, you've got to do something else. And so my career started as a coach / admissions counselor for the school, and so I got to see kind of the business side of higher ed. And worked in that capacity while I was coaching. Eventually, I did gain a head coach role with the women's basketball program, also coached the men's golf team, and so I was able to be a full-time coach for a couple years. I found out pretty quickly that coaching was not my passion. Like athletics was my passion, but it wasn't coaching athletics. And the time I spent, working in admissions, kind of helped me decide, okay, I want to stay in higher ed, but it's not necessarily coaching. So I actually moved out of athletics for a few years into just academic counseling, academic advising. Really enjoyed that. And then my wife's family's from this area. That's how I ended up back at S&T, and actually started in the financial aid office as kind of that foot in the door here in this area to higher ed. And then through a series of connections, and in fact it started with John Keene over there, offering to run a shot clock or a play clock for football. I think I ran the play clock my first year in the financial aid office. Had some family connections that knew John, and just volunteered to help. Got to know some people in the athletic department, and eventually it came into a position where I could come over here and serve as an administrator. And so it really combined the best parts of my collegiate playing career, coaching career, and then higher ed career, all the good stuff into one package. And, I've been here for approaching 10 years. So that was obviously it made sense. And it really helped me kind of craft the ideal career for me, at least coming out of college. And so yeah, it was a good experience.
For sure. No, you kind of managed to knock out like answers to like my next four questions on the answer to one. So that's efficiency right there. That's things we love to see.
That's compliance officers have to do.
Um, what was it about compliance that you kind of ended up there? Was that just kind of like a need that needed to be filled at that time when you migrated across the street to athletics?
So when I came over to athletics, they only had one assistant AD type. Well, they actually had a couple, but we only had one. The person that was working on athletics or on compliance at the time was also in charge of all the business functions of the department. So all of your budgets and financial processes and HR processes, and all the money stuff that with a 17 sport athletic department takes up a ton of time. Also had to do all the compliance and eligibility. And as part of the peer visit process that the GLVC does, that was one of the needs they identified for the institution at that time was you need somebody else to help with the compliance and eligibility because the person doing it has way too much on their plate. And so, you need another assistant athletic director type person in the department to take that, either take the money stuff and let that person handle the compliance, or take the compliance and let them just worry about the business side of it.
Either way, you need to split it up.
Either way, you need to split it up in order to have the best scenario. And the university supported that recommendation and created a position to support that, specifically on the compliance and eligibility. And having already had those connections with the athletic department, found out about the opportunity. My past experience lended itself very well to compliance. I had coaching experience. I had higher ed experience, both in financial aid and academics, which are key areas that the student
almost kind of makes it a natural transition.
It was a very natural transition because of the experiences I had in the various aspects. Because it's not just athletics. When you're talking about compliance and eligibility, there are financial aid aspects to it. There's obviously academic aspects to it. So it seemed to kind of come together at the right time.
Talk real quick. What is it about Missouri S&T that makes it such a special place to work at and be a part of?
I think you get a lot of you get a little bit of everything at S&T. I think that's attractive to a lot of people. Moving in, it's a good sized school, so you're going to get the kind of the real university experience. It's not a school of 300 people where pretty soon everybody there is, and there's not a lot of campus life and culture. But that's to say it's not so big that it doesn't feel like a family atmosphere. So I think it's a good mix of being big enough to have a lot of that university feel and college town feel, but not being so big that you're lost in the shuffle. I think that's very attractive. And Rolla, like I said, Rolla kind of follows that model. It's big enough to have that good time aspect to the college experience, but yet it's not so big. You're not in a big city. You still get that feeling of home and that feeling of community within the town. So, and then the people obviously here that I've worked with have been great. If they haven't been great, I wouldn't be here after 10 years. So yeah, I would say it's a lot of being just right in a lot of different aspects.
Sure. Transition here again. In addition to all your duties as a compliance director and assistant AD here, you also do a little bit of officiating out on the side. How did you kind of get into that and decide that was something you wanted to do on the side?
So yeah, I call it my side hustle. Officiating. I actually got into it a little late in life. I would say late in life. A lot of officials jump in it right as they finish playing, and that was not me. I didn't start officiating till I was in my early 30s, probably 10 or 12 years out of my athletic experience. Honestly, it just started because we had a house back in Oklahoma where we came from that we were still paying a mortgage on, and a rent payment here because we hadn't sold our house yet. So needed a little extra cash
Little extra
to
money
make
always
both of those
helps. Yeah.
payments. So I'd officiated a little bit in intramurals when I was in school, and ran into a guy I was talking to, and just about sports and things. And I mentioned, I had refed a little bit, and so he's like, "Well, you should sign up. We need officials in the area." So I started doing basketball, probably right when I got here in 2012. I only did it for a semester until we sold the house. Once we sold the house, like I'm good, so I got out of it. But then the next few years, had a couple pretty bad sprained ankles playing pickup basketball with the college kids, and decided it was time to not focus so much on trying to play basketball, but I still wanted to be involved in the game, and the exercise was great. So I got back into officiating, and it kind of just took off for me from there. Within a year, I had gone to a women's basketball officiating camp and been hired in some college conferences on the women's side. That was about 5 years ago. And then 3 years ago, I decided to start doing football as well in the fall, and that's been a blast. So it's kind of three pronged for me. One part is just being around the sports is fun. The atmosphere, the adrenaline that you feel out there when you're running around
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
with the kids, and the crowd's loud, and sometimes people are yelling at you. That's part of it too. But it's great exercise, so it keeps you active without the increased risk of injury that if you're going to play pickup ball with a bunch of college kids that are half your age. That's something that's nice to get that exercise.
A little easier.
Not saying you never get hurt officiating, because it does happen, but the frequency is far less than when you're
a little easier on the ankles, right?
Yes, absolutely. Less cutting and starting and stopping. And then it's a nice, like I said, it's a nice side hustle, a nice little source of income on the side that can bolster your bottom line, which is never bad. So. Yeah, it's been met a lot of people around here, and so yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and luckily my job is flexible enough that it sometimes requires leaving early from work a little bit, but yeah, it's been a blast.
For sure. No, as someone who has dabbled in the world of officiating too, and is looking to try and get back in that, I absolutely get. It's fun to have that other perspective and still be a part of it, and then obviously anything that comes of it financially is always a nice little bonus too. What are some of the wildest or weirdest games that you've had the either fortune or misfortune, depending on your perspective, of being a part of at any level or any sport?
Yeah, it's I've been, I guess I could say, lucky. It's hard for me to think of any truly crazy situations. I mean, the things you see on YouTube of brawls in the stands or anything like that, I've been lucky, especially around here in Central Missouri, and we don't see a lot of that extreme behavior. The more weird stuff that has happened has just been quirky little things. You have a couple times in a football game, we've had deer jump a fence and run across the field in the middle of a game. The smaller levels you go, the funnier the time is. I did a little peewee football, the little third and fourth graders, my first year, to just kind of get used to how to officiate football, and those little guys are hilarious, and so there's a lot of fun with that. But yeah, just little strange things, that keep you smiling, keep you laughing, keep things light. I remember it was just this year. I was at the scores table, and we were holding up the play because we had some subs coming in and out. So you hold a hand up, and this was a high school game, and so I've got my hand up. I was like, okay, let's not play yet until we get all our subs in and out.
Yeah.
And two of the subs coming out of the game both high-fived me on their way out of the game, which I don't know if they really thought I wanted to high-five them or if they were just being silly. But there's all kinds of things like that I could probably think of that just keep it light and keep the tension down sometimes. But yeah, I mean, you always get something weird almost every game that happens, or some situation, but it just adds to the fun.
D2 CCA, D2 ADA, P2R Officials Appreciation Week for spring sports officials was earlier this month. I believe all the GLVC schools participated in that. Had messages sent that they put together thanking officials for all they do, sharing stuff on social media and everything else. As someone who does officiate multiple sports over multiple levels, what would you say to someone who's considering getting into officiating, and how important is it that we have enough officials, considering there's a shortage of officials across the board, kind of at every level right now?
Yeah, that's a big issue everywhere in the country is the number of officials, and I think we've kind of seen this threatened, not threatened, but kind of forecasted in the last few years that the officials associations are trying to say, hey, we are in a situation where we may have to cancel some games or move some games, and I think because of the shortage of officials. And I think that now we're finally starting to see that. Now we are seeing news stories where games are canceled and games are moved. I mean, just locally, I know in the St. Louis area, they have to play some varsity football games on Thursday nights and Saturday afternoons because they don't have the guys and the ladies to officiate. They just don't have the numbers. And so yeah, it's extremely critical in the sports landscape that that they bring new blood and new bodies into officiating. And anybody that is considering, I would say definitely do it, at least for a year or two. Just try it, and try it when you first get done. With like if you were a college athlete, try it when you're first done. Because you can make some guys and ladies make careers out of it because they start right away and things like that. And you see, I will say you see a lot of the horror stories on YouTube and Instagram of things, and that kind of stuff does happen, and probably a little more than it used to. The bad stuff you see, but that's the exception. For the most part, especially in an area like ours, you're going to get pretty respectful fans most of the time, and coaches. Sometimes are worse than others, but it's amazing. When I first started, any little comment bothered me, really bothered me. Like, oh, did I get that wrong? But after 2 or 3 years, it doesn't take long, and you develop that thick ref skin, and once you get to a level where you're good enough, whether or not you messed it up for the most part. So, you have a call and a coach or a fan doesn't like it, I have internally a few different reactions. I never talk to a fan, but you have some internal reactions to that kind of thing. And the more you do it, the better you know the game and the better you know your calls. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I messed that one up, in your head. Those are pretty easy I was wrong there. Or you're like, no, I was right there, and you feel fine about it because you saw it, you were right. Or it could be some, that was 50-50. They've got an argument. Probably on another night, maybe I would have went the other way with it.
Just all depends on the angle and the positioning and how it looked and
Yeah.
everything, for sure.
Yeah. So I would say I'd encourage anybody that has any knowledge level of sports to give it a shot if they have the time and just try it. If nothing else, you'll have a great experience and you'll be a much better fan for it because you'll sit there and you'll know what it's like to be out there. I think that should be the punishment for any fan that's steps outside the boundaries of behavior.
Go suit up
before you can come back and watch your
Yeah.
kids' games. You've got to go ref a weekend tournament, and I would almost guarantee that their whole perspective would change if they were the one out there, and that they would be a lot better fan in the stands after having putting on the stripes themselves.
Life-altering experience, so to speak. Go ahead and wrap up with something fun. Ed went out to the Pacific Northwest for the NERSA conference. Spent a little bit of time out there. I believe that was all spring break stuff. Went out and did some golfing out there.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
I did. That was wonderful. So yeah, part of my job title is recreation. So I oversee our rec department, our intramural department. I oversee it in a very hands-off manner. We've got managers and directors there that are awesome at what they do. So, it is very much a hands-off supervisory position because they rock out over there and do great things there and don't need a lot of supervision. But I did go out there to NERSA with them, which is the national convention for that. We're looking for an intramural director position that we want to hire for, and so I went out there with them to help kind of recruit, because that is the place to recruit for if you want to fill that kind of position. So I was lucky enough. At the end of the convention, my wife flew out and met me at the end of it, and we took off down the Oregon coast for a few days, a little extra time out there. It's beautiful country. It's like nothing you've ever seen out there, and got to go down to Bandon Dunes, which is a nationally known golf resort down on the cliffs of Oregon, on the coast there, the coastal cliffs of Oregon, and play some golf down there on kind of that true links style golf. Looks like they just took a piece of Scotland or Ireland and brought it over.
Dropped it right there.
Dropped it right there. And so that was fun. I've got several golfing buddies here in the department. I will say there was some I won't call it jealousy or anything, but I
Sure.
did catch some heat from my golfing buddies here about that trip, and how lucky I was to go. But when I got back, I brought them a couple little gifts from Bandon Dunes, and I think that smoothed that over, and we were able to talk about it and have some chuckles about it. But it truly is one of those things in athletics that provides you those experiences that you may not get in another job. It was really great, something I'll remember for a long time.
Sure. Well, Josh, I appreciate you taking time out today to chat with us. I know you got some busy things, in the day-to-day of the job, and then also doing all the things of being a dad and a father and all that good stuff. But again, appreciate you taking time. Thanks for the conversation. Really great talk today. Covered a lot of different things. I think I learned a few things today. So appreciate you taking time and stopping by.
All right, thanks, Murph. Appreciate it.
That's Josh Lind, Assistant Athletic Director for Compliance and Recreation here at Missouri S&T. And before we wrap up this episode of Inside the Mind, I do want to take a moment to again recognize that we did have Officials Appreciation Week earlier this month. I want to recognize a very important part of today's college game that's often overlooked and underappreciated, as officials put in a tremendous amount of time, effort, and dedication to their craft to support their sports and our student athletes. Their commitment to a fair, safe, competitive contest is a critical part of the student-athlete experience, and we want to thank them for all that they do. And if there's anybody listening who might be interested in suiting up and putting on the stripes, go to sayyes2officiating.com. It's, again, a great way to help stay in shape, stay in touch with competition, remain a part of the games that you might not be able to play in anymore, earn a little bit extra money on the side, and also help reverse a trend in the decline of amount of amateur officials in the country that's affecting athletics at all levels. Again, that's sayyes2officiating.com in case you are interested in putting on the stripes and getting out there to help officiate. That'll help wrap us up on this episode of Inside the Mind. Again, want to thank Price Chopper for their support of Missouri S&T Athletics, their membership in the Minor Corporate Club, and their sponsorship of this episode today. Again, want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to spend some time with us, either watching or listening wherever you're at. If you've missed any previous episodes, you can go to the Fan Zone tab of minorathletics.com, look for the Inside the Mind podcast. All previous episodes are archived there, along with links to all the platforms where this show is available. Also, be sure to subscribe to this show wherever you may be watching or listening. You can follow us on YouTube, Google Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, Deezer, or our Podcastix web player, which is our hosting service. Again, thank you all for taking time out of your day to spend a little bit of it with us. It means a lot to us. Without you, we wouldn't be able to keep doing this show, and we do have the numbers to help back that up. Thank you all so much again. We appreciate it. And as always, cheers and go Miners.